We talk a lot about leadership here at A Seat at the Table. It's a critical part of running any business these days, whether it's a global corporation or a small local operation. Nowadays, for many senior executives, there's the dual challenge of keeping themselves focused in the face of an onslaught of market twists and turns, as well as supporting their teams and giving them the direction and confidence so that they can deliver their best performance. That leaves many leaders asking, what's the best way to do this? I wish I had a playbook for how to handle some of this stuff. In fact, there is such a playbook, and today I'm talking with the man who wrote it. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for taking the time to join me here on A Seat at the Table, where we talk to leading executives, entrepreneurs, and innovators who share their insights, experience, and outlook on business, technology, and leadership. It's wonderful to have you as part of our international community that now includes industry professionals like you in over 100 countries. Andrew Bryant is a coach and C-suite advisor who has helped leaders at every level adapt to this new environment. His latest book, Enter the New Leadership Playbook, is the definitive guide for leaders who are looking for a practical guide to understanding people and driving accelerated results while also being human. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Andrew talks about what self-leadership is and how it effectively brings leaders and teams together. He outlines his 7 principles of the leadership playbook. He talks about why job satisfaction and quality of life can be enhanced significantly by drawing talent, and how leaders can articulate what is required of an employee in a way that they can meet the objective. Before we get started, if you were a supply chain executive who'd like to finally put an end to information overload and get a concise, fact-based summary of key market shifts and developments, as well as sharp insights as to what's likely to impact sourcing in the coming months, then the current situation in sourcing is exactly what you're looking for. To learn more, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net, where you can get all of the details. Now let's sit down with Andrew and find out how we can be better leaders. We've talked to a lot of people on the show about leadership, and I think what I liked about some of what you bring to the table is you approach it from a different point of view. In your new book, Enter the New Leadership Playbook, it appears that you help leaders adapt to this new environment, which I think many people are trying to do. What are some of the biggest adaptations that leaders need to make in the current environment?
So if the question is, what are the things that leaders need to do? Well, from all of my work, you can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. And,
right.
Whether I'm doing a leadership or a management training, I always tell leaders that they need a mirror. They need to look in a mirror, because if they're not getting the results from their people, take a look at yourself first. So if you're expecting your people to be adaptable and flexible and negotiate hybrid working, and then are you doing the same? If you're expecting them to be calm, not stressed, not face burnout, then you need to do the same as well. You cannot expect your people to do something you're not prepared to do. And there's a story in the book about the beginning of the pandemic where a CEO who I knew I'd coached before had been parachuted into a company that a venture capitalist had purchased, and they dropped him in as CEO. He saw this as his big opportunity. He had everything lined up. He had a rebranding launch. Metaphorically, the plane was on the runway, fueled and ready to take off, and then COVID hit. And we were on a coaching call, and he was figuratively on the floor in the fetal position. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, my runway, my vision, everything was lined up. Why does this happen to me? And I went, oh, come on, seriously, you and I have done enough work together to know it's not about you. It's not personal. And you're the CEO. And if you're struggling, sitting in a nice house, with a swimming pool, what do you think your people are feeling? What about your people in India or Southeast Asia who, are sitting in the corridor trying to do a call because, they've got the kids at home, and they need to do a virtual call, and they're sitting in the hallway with a thumb drive Wi-Fi. So right. Let's take the focus off you and take a focus on your people. And he's a great guy, and he's got good self-awareness. He said, thanks for the call out, Andrew. And he pivoted, and he got on the phone. He talked to his people and said, what do you need? And he was calm. He was adaptable. He was empathetic. And then that cascaded down through the organization. And they've had 3 awesome quarters. They came out of the pandemic racing because they built a culture of trust and looking after their people. Yeah, they lost some people along the way, and they lost some business along the way. But as soon as things opened up, they were ready to go because it was from the top down.
I think that's a really great point, and I think it's something that needs to be said because in the past, when I was growing up, which obviously was a long time ago, we were taught that these were basic leadership skills, that you take care of your people first, that you walk the talk, that you set an example, that as a leader, you're supposed to be a role model, you're not supposed to be the one complaining, and you're supposed to see what the others need first, sort of get them out the door first, and then you follow. And a lot of that changed, I believe, in the last 20 years, that it became a rules for thee but not for me, a sense of entitlement. So I like the fact that you talk about that. How does that tie in with your point about self-leadership?
Well, in this book, I've taken a new approach to leadership, a very pragmatic one. I give leadership classes on MBA programs as an external faculty. I understand the leadership theory, but what leaders need is what is the conversation I need to have? And so I've articulated 12 plays, which are really conversations that leaders need to have. And those plays are driven by, I chose 7 principles.
Right.
And the reason I chose a principle is a principle gives us a level of direction. And the challenge with a lot of leadership literature, and when I wrote my 2012 book on self-leadership, there was this list of traits. Leaders are like this, leaders are like this, leaders are like this. And I read one book, and this list was so long, it might as well have included can walk on water and turn water into wine. I mean, you clearly had to be miraculous to be a leader. And so leadership for me always starts with self. You can't lead others unless you first lead yourself. And self-leadership starts with self-awareness. If you don't know yourself, you can't know other people. There's a strong correlation between how well we know ourselves and how empathetic and understanding we can be of others. Now, to the earlier point, and I just want to loop back to this, the leader must go first, but the leader doesn't have to be perfect. Because leaders are learners. Leaders are human beings in process. To the story I told, this was a CEO who was stressed and his vision was disappearing. He didn't know what to do. A lot of leaders during the pandemic, they didn't have a playbook for this. They had plans for 1 week disruption at the most.
Yes.
If the power went out or if we had a security breach, but they didn't have a plan for 2 years of shutdown. They didn't. They just
True.
And so they were worried about their families, and they needed to manage their stress. So I think self-leadership is not perfection. I've been writing and speaking about self-leadership for over 20 years. But trust me, my wife will occasionally tell me, "Go self-leadership yourself,"
Right.
because I'm going to lose it every now and again with certain things because I'm human too. So I think everything starts with self-leadership, and the leader has to say, "I'm human too." I've got some concerns. The distinction between the leader and the follower is the leader will say, "Hey, yeah, I've got some concerns. Yes, there's some uncertainty. However, we've got a vision and we will work it out. We will find it, and I'm with you to make it go there." That's the distinction between the leader and the follower. The follower is looking for somebody to tell them it's going to be okay.
Right.
Follow me. This is the plan. And the leader is prepared to step into that ambiguity and say, "Look, I don't necessarily know, but together we'll work it out. And I'm with you." That's what makes a leader in the current environment.
So in other words, it's almost, to make it very simple, good old-fashioned backbone, I suppose, and integrity and character, to use old words. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
They are. Again, we're going back to sort of a trait-based orientation. See, integrity is not a noun, it's a verb.
Yes.
Right? If someone has integrity, it sounds like it's a fixed thing.
Right.
But integrity is doing the right thing regardless of whether anybody's looking.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Leadership leadership isn't a noun, it is a verb. It's an ongoing process. Just as I mentioned, self-leadership is a daily practice. It's like taking a shower, as the famous Zig Ziglar talked about. Motivation is like taking a shower. If you don't take it for a couple of days, you're going to stink. Your attitude's going to stink. Your self-leadership is going to. So leaders will make mistakes. Leaders will miss a shower and have a stinky day. So that's a reality. Integrity, I agree, is the sum of the choices and the decisions that we make. Right? Character, again, or backbone, as you describe, is just this, willingness to face reality and make the adjustment. And there's an acronym I put in the book that I've been sharing with people for years, which is AAA, which is accept the reality. Stop, don't deny, don't blame, complain. It is what it is, right? I mean, look, air travel has been disrupted over the last few weeks, and I've experienced that myself, right? And if you've ever had a plane delayed, and we've all had it happen to us, we had an expectation the plane was going to take off and we were going to go to our destination. The plane is delayed or canceled, and suddenly we have to accept the reality. And at the airline desk, you see the people who are not accepting reality. They're going, I want to fly, and I want to fly now. Do you not know who I am? And the poor girl at the front desk is going, I'm sorry, sir, there just isn't a plane. I don't care. I want you to fly me. And there isn't a plane. And so they've lost it, right? So this has been a very current example I've seen. The plane's delayed. You have to accept that. The next is you have to adjust. You have to adjust your expectations. You have to adjust your behavior. And then you can advance towards your destination. You've changed the expectation, you've changed the timeline on the outcome. But if you get stuck in denial, blaming, and complaining, you cannot move forwards.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Now, you defined what you call the 7 principles of the leadership playbook. What are they? Why are these 7 principles so important?
Right. Well, as I said, the first one is, starts with self-leadership, right? If we can't lead others, we can't lead ourselves. And let me just find the page on the book. So there we go, the page on the book, so we can go through. We've talked about the 12 plays. Self-leadership comes first, and that's so important that people understand that. Leaders and learners, leadership and learning are indistinguishable from each other. Number 3, we could perhaps give credit to, the founders of Intel, but it was adopted by Amazon, which is progress over perfection.
Right.
You cannot be a perfectionist as a leader. Everything is dynamic. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, or as Mike Tyson more elegantly put it, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah. So progress over perfection. Are we on a day-to-day basis getting better? Is it perfect? No, but can we make the adjustment, be agile? Disagree and commit, which is also a very important point about having a voice. And again, that was adopted by Amazon as one of their leadership principles, is that as a leader, you have to have your own perspective. One of the assessment center tests that leaders will often go to, if an organization is hiring somebody into a leadership position, they'll often put somebody in an assessment center, which is a sort of a reality-based scenario, and the psychologists or the coaches are watching. How do you handle that? And it's really interesting. If you watch people make a decision and they went into a meeting and they had no pre-learning on the decision, they will adapt to whoever is leading that decision or where the group is going. It's much more interesting to give people a pre-briefing and say, okay, this is your perspective. Now I want you to go into the meeting and argue for your perspective. A simple example would be a CV, and say, look, this is the guy you want to hire. But there's 9 other people in there with 9 other CVs. Your job is to promote your guy, however, to make the best decision for the company. Now, this is ambiguous because I want my guy, but I also have to make the decision. And it's really interesting. I've done this many, many times, watching how people handle that. They need to be able to push back strongly. This is my idea. This is my candidate. This is why he's good. And also at the same time, listen that if somebody's got a better argument, right, and then as a group commit to that better argument. And I've been working with senior leadership teams for over 20 years, and many fail to do this. And working through how to do this really increases the success of a leadership team, that they can have a great discussion and then commit to the outcome, not leave the meeting and say, oh, well, we decided this, but I don't agree with it. And you pass that down to your people.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So number 5 is executive presence and the ability to project confidence, gravitas, and poise under pressure, and the ability to read the room. A lot of people miss that last piece, right? So executive presence is, I've got confidence, I've got gravitas, or I'm substantive. You know what you're talking about, and you read the room. So, do you need to step into a leadership position? Do you need to step back and listen to other people? And you notice people with that calm confidence. They don't have to say very much, but there's an energy field around them in the room that, well, we need to defer or we need to ask them their opinion, right? They don't have to interject their opinion. So executive presence is incredibly important as leaders. Number 6 is an obvious, which is build the team. And you cannot be successful as a leader if you can't put a team together. Right. If you can't delegate to that team, if you can't empower that team, you cannot scale unless you know how to build a team. And a team has to be diverse and inclusive, which is the 7th point, which is diversity matters. Right. And all of the research is unequivocal about the fact that diverse teams are more robust, make better decisions. And it's not just diversity of gender, but diversity of age and diversity of perspective. You didn't all go to the same Ivy League university and therefore have an embedded bias. There's not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with an Ivy League university, but you've got to get people from different backgrounds to see things in different ways. And so those are the 7 principles that I chose. Now, are they exhaustive? Of course not. Could somebody come up and add an 8th or a 9th? Of course they could. But in terms of what drives the 12 plays that I chose for this playbook or handbook, whatever you want to call it, they are the ones that have helped my clients to do the day-to-day of leadership. So it's not, and you notice it doesn't start with have a vision, have a purpose. Right. That actually is a practical conversation. We have to, that's play number 1, start with why, which of course Simon Sinek in his TED Talk made very famous, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You also said that job satisfaction and quality of life can be enhanced significantly by drawing talent. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So, I have an acronym in the book, which is used by some people in human resources, which is COW. Okay. It's a great acronym, COW. And COW stands for capacity, opportunity, and willingness, right? So, I teach leaders, when you're looking at your people, do they have capacity? And I've often, when I'm coaching a CEO or a managing director, been part of the succession planning. And they say, our team, you've done some work with them. What do you think of them? Because I've got to put this succession plan together. And sometimes they will point to this most senior person within the team and say, well, he's my obvious successor. And I go, really? Why? Well, because he's the most senior. I go, so my question is, does he have any more runway? Is he at maximum capacity or she at maximum capacity? Are they already operating as much as they've got, or do they have more? Right. So capacity, the ability to contribute, skills, talent, whatever is in there. Opportunity is the person in the right position. Do they have the opportunity to show that capacity? And the third one, of course, is do they have the willingness? I mean, you can have highly intelligent, highly capable people, give them an opportunity and they squander it. They just don't have the willingness. And willingness goes a long way. I mean, there's that great movie, motivational movie, and if you haven't seen it, it's a classic American sports movie called Rudy, which is the guy who's too small to play on the football team. But he has willingness in buckets, but he doesn't have the capacity. He just doesn't have the body size. But finally, they give him an opportunity in his last game, and it's a beautifully inspirational book. But the point being is, if you were the coach, you don't play Rudy on the starting line because he doesn't have the capacity with all the willingness in the world. So you got to have those 3 things, right? So thinking about this, and so people lose all their joy for life if you're asking so much of them. They're working 12, 15-hour days. They have no time for their family. They have no time for their health. they are going to burn out. It is not sustainable, right? And particularly as we move into managing the hybrid environment. I had a conversation yesterday with a partner of a professional service firm who is a partner, but his boss is saying, I think we didn't hit our numbers. You should cancel your holidays and all the holidays of your people till we hit our numbers. And we had a discussion about how sustainable that is.
Right.
I mean, we have the great resignation, don't we? People are leaving, right? And I say, and I know personally, I work hard. I started work at 10 years old in my father's hardware store. I have a strong work ethic as an entrepreneur, but I have the self-awareness to know when I hit burnout, when I'm sitting in front of this computer and nothing's coming out and I just turn it off, I take a couple of days off and recharge my batteries. Now, if organizations are not recognizing that we're dealing with humans, then they will lose those humans very quickly. The book's subtitle of the New Leadership Playbook is Being Human Whilst Delivering Accelerated Results.
Right.
Right. And I was almost going to call it driving for accelerated results. And in the book, I use the metaphor of driving because, we've all had the experience of being in a car or driving a car. And particularly if you're driving a manual shift, there's always a balance between the acceleration and the fuel consumption, right? You can accelerate by staying in a lower gear and revving the engine and you can go forwards, but your fuel consumption is going to drop, right? And you can try and speed, but sometimes there's nothing you can do. You're stuck behind a series of trucks or, there's roadworks and you need to, you're better off to, if you've gone a long journey, you're better off to pull off in a roadside service station and refresh yourself with some coffee, throw some water on your face and get in. So it's better to arrive, 30 minutes later than dead on time.
Right.
Literally dead on time. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was a bit of a bad use of words, but somewhat intentional. So we're not having this conversation between, how can you bring your best self? And my work in self-leadership is always to ask, what is the best version of me? And is the best version of me strung out on caffeine and alcohol and lack of sleep, or is the best version of me rested, being creative? So I make sure I schedule my own time. I mean, in terms of how can I be the best version of myself for the meetings I need to be, for the presentation, the speeches, the podcasts I get interviewed on, right? And I think people need to, this disagree and commit and say, look, boss, what are the outcomes that you want me to deliver? I will deliver those if you agree on those, but how I get there. And I mean, if you're a mum working from home, that was a boon because you could actually do the work when the kids were asleep, maybe 7 till 11 p.m. You got a lot of your work done and you were able to be there with your children. But if your boss was expecting you to be sat at the desk, then you had a mewling child sitting on your lap. Not smart.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out in the next few years. You advise leaders to articulate what is required of an employee in a way that they can meet that objective. I think that's interesting. How should they do that? In your opinion, where do leaders go wrong in communicating objectives to team members?
It's communication 101. The word communio, the etymology of the word communication, the word communication contains communio, which is the Latin for sharing, right? So communication only happens when we have shared meaning and understanding. And if I'm teaching in a university class, I'll say, have you ever asked a subordinate to do something and then followed up with, do you understand? And they'll say, yes. Right. And I said, do they understand? And a lot of people laugh and say, no. And I said, well, actually, they do understand. They understand what they understood, not necessarily what you wanted them to understand.
That's a good point.
All of us have this mental picture in our head of what we want something to be like, and then it's not necessarily delivered that way. And I might use the example of, let's use the word for a couch or a sofa, right? And I'd say, sofa, do you understand? And everybody say, yes, we understand sofa. And then I'd say, okay, well, create a mental picture of a sofa. Great. What color is it? What's it made of? How many people can sit on it, right? And then, of course, we get the variation from cloth or leather or blue or brown or white and 3 and 2 and 7. And so, and I said, well, that's one word. If we can have that level of misunderstanding between two mental pictures with one word, what about a paragraph?
Right.
So communication has only happened when there's a feedback loop, right? So here's what we're trying to achieve, and this is why we're trying to achieve it. How would you go about it?
Oh,
would
that's
be
a
a great
good question. Yeah.
Right? And then you get to see the gap. Feedback conversations, career conversations, performance conversations should always start with a question. How do you think you're doing? And then you can say, somebody says, I'm doing brilliantly, I'm doing wonderful. Well, then, maybe there's a case of denial. But if they go, well, hey, I'm struggling here, or hey, I've got some great ideas here, but I'm not getting the resources, suddenly you've got a very different mental picture. And you as the manager, the leader can say, I see where you're struggling. Here's how I can support and adjust it. And with asynchronous working as well, and I think this is worth talking about as well. When we were sat at the desk, it was synchronous working. We're all in the office 9 to 5. But now with global teams, with communication, everybody's doing Slack or WhatsApp or whatever team communication tool they've got. It's very important to get that feedback loop. Hey, this is what I've discussed. What are your plans for this?
How would you go about achieving this objective?
Yeah.
Asking them do you go so far, in other words, to ask them to create specific benchmarks or milestones that then you would expect them to achieve?
Yes. That was a great question. I'm happy to agree to. And it really depends on the situation, right? In communication 101 is, what does it look like, sound like, feel like? You could even say, what does it sound like, feel like, taste like, right?
Yes.
So we are going to be successful. Well, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What does success look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like, right? Because sometimes we get what we thought was success and it doesn't feel very good, right? So we have to take that moment to step into the future and go, well, what does success look like, sound like, feel like? Now, if we're putting together a building, right, and we've got a set of plans and we know how many stories it is and where it's going to be, that's fairly obvious. But when it comes to the interior design of that, there's a whole field of where people design space so that you get a certain feeling when you walk into it. Right? And Google was very famous for changing the paradigm of what an office looks like, because it's got hammocks and a free food bar, and suddenly there's a different feeling. Right now, there's a whole series of perspectives about whether that's a good idea or not. So when somebody says, I want you to do the interior design, well, what do you want it to feel like? Now, this is really interesting that a lot of leaders and adults, full stop, are emotionally illiterate. I remember when my kids were at kindergarten, coming home and with little diagrams. How do you feel? I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm excited, I'm curious, I'm wondering, I'm playful. Right? You ask an adult today, how are you? Okay. Right? So and as a coach, I'm always saying, coaching always starts from the body. Well, how do you feel today? I want to talk about this. I go, yeah, great. But right now, how are you feeling? Well, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I'm anxious. Okay, well, that's really useful information before we start talking about anything, right? So having a level of emotional intelligence we've been talking about for many, many years, but just having an emotional vocabulary. How do you feel right now? How do you feel about where you're at, and how do you feel about where you want to go? Because human beings are thinking, feeling machines, right? And self-leadership is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. I remember going into a Starbucks many years ago and ordering my tall, non-fat latte, and the girl said, "Are you having a good day?" And she did. And I asked her, "Is that your question or is that Starbucks' question?" Now, the funny thing is, I'd given her a 20 and she kept counting out the change because my question had put her into a hypnotic loop because she couldn't answer it. Is it her question or is it Starbucks' question? And she counted out change for a 50. I gave her it back. But this is a good trick, by the way, if anybody wants to be, it just blew her brain because I'd called her on the fact that she was doing what she had been told to do, ask the customer, how are you doing? But she was coming from a place that she clearly wasn't okay.
Right. That's really a very funny example. Oh, Andrew, you have shared so many interesting things, and I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm always trying to up my game, and I've learned a lot from you. I appreciate it. I think everyone listening to this podcast has learned a lot too. So, how do we connect with you? I think people would want to be able to reach out to you, and where do we find your book?
Okay, well, I'd love to say in all good bookstores, but it's hard to find a good bookstore these days. Of course, online, the online bookstores, Amazon and all the others stock the book. You find me on selfleadership.com,
Okay.
where you'll see links to the book from the front page. And there is a designated page for the book, thenewleadershipplaybook.com. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn, which is where everybody in business is these days. And you can reach out and connect with me there and mention the Jane Singer podcast, A Seat at the Table, and then I'll know where you heard me from.
Well, that sounds wonderful. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes as well. They'll also be over on our podcast website, seatpodcast.com. So please, I would encourage you, definitely, Andrew's book is a must-read, and connect with him. He's got an awful lot to share. So thank you again, Andrew, for joining us here.
Absolutely my pleasure, Jane.
Thank you for tuning in to A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. Your feedback powers this show. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Also, share episodes you found valuable on LinkedIn or other social media and call out your biggest insight or takeaway from the program. And don't forget to tag me, Jane Singer. I love seeing which episodes you liked best. And if you have time, please leave a review on any of the major podcast channels. Also, don't forget to check out our website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. You'll find all kinds of bonus content there, including free ebooks, discounts on apps and other products, as well as a preview of upcoming podcast episodes. You can also send a message with any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions there, and yes, I will read them. Thank you for joining me today and supporting the show. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in our next episode of A Seat at the Table.